So as we are kind of weathering this regulatory reform, are there any optimistic or positive outlooks we can speak to? Maybe this is a good time to segue to NEPA, or any sort of permitting streamline we can think maybe is on the horizon.
A positive thing. That's
well,
fun.
I'm just thinking more so as we revisit some of maybe the red tape that is more bureaucratic within NEPA. Maybe there are some positive outlooks we can take from it, or not. I'm just wondering.
Well, I think that there's maybe a small amount of
just
positivity and a lot of not negativity, but a lot of uncertainty that really does make it very uncomfortable when we talk about environmental conditions and being able to protect our waters and our air and those things that are really important for human health, right? Like this is a human health issue. We protect the environment for the people who live there in the communities. So to see that deregulation take place is concerning.
Absolutely. For
all of us. Now, I think that NEPA in itself is a wonderful idea. It solved a lot of issues. It controlled a lot of things, and we were really happy that we had.
We're all environmentalists
NEPA,
here,
right? But everybody should be happy we had a NEPA. I mean, it does control, bad things getting out into the environment. What it did, though, it got really complicated. It got really long. It got really expensive. The more we put on the more we put on the requirements of NEPA, the harder it got to go through. Now, do I say that stopped projects? Not always. I mean, there's probably a few that it had something to do with maybe them giving up because they just couldn't see
the
a way
timeline
through.
Just lengthened.
Or, it was they just were unwilling to move what needed to be moved. There's a lot of complexity associated with this, but it did get really difficult in some ways. So if they could find a way to streamline environmental assessments and the way we report on it and the way we bring projects forward, that's a positive.
Yes.
But deregulation in general just isn't a good idea. It just isn't.
So a big positive of NEPA is that it is one of the only formal, if not the only formalized place where public comment can come into play.
That's a good.
And it is incredibly important for people to have a voice on the projects that are happening that are going to affect them and impact them, right? So that is a big standing piece of NEPA that should be upheld, and that people deserve the right to have a voice in these projects. So if you can imagine having a mine open up in your backyard, right? You'd want a chance to say, I don't like that, or here's my concerns, and please address my concerns. So if NEPA does become deregulated, and there has been, in the previous Trump administration, there was an effort, and I will say, one positive thing I'm gonna say is it worked, an effort to streamline NEPA. It was very specific to the Department of Interior. It was Executive Order, I'm gonna get fact checked by Tom Hale on this, but Executive Order 3355, I believe, that basically stated that NEPA through the DOI needed to be shorter, it needed to be more succinct, and it needed to be done within a year. That was actually pretty successful, right? That can be emulated in other agencies, and it may very well be in this administration emulated in other agencies.
So we are looking for each agency to inform us on their new NEPA procedure, right?
Right. So CEQ right now has an interim guidance or interim decision that is through comment period through the end of March. Yep. An executive order came out from the new administration stating that CEQ had overstepped themselves when they put out federal regulation, like guidance, uniform guidance on how to interpret NEPA. CEQ is going to roll that back. However, they're very specific in this interim decision that it's going to be up to each agency to write and follow their own policies as regards to NEPA. So Dirk and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, and you run this risk of then having, much like the Army Corps, right, with the Clean Water Act, having to deal with all these different agencies doing it very, very differently, right? So that's going to complicate things for our clients, I think. You're probably going to want to find people that really understand that particular agency's NEPA, which, to be real, that had already been happening for years, where everybody kind of has their own guidance. So you already get specialists. Like I know a lot of folks that specialize in BLM, NEPA, right? Or U.S. Fish and Wildlife or Forest Service. They have their own particular way of doing it already. It's probably going to deviate even further going forward.
If I'm looking towards the future, I think as difficult as some of the NEPA components have been and how tougher they got over time, this relaxation of NEPA is going to backfire. It's going to backfire in that the agencies, talked about Chevron earlier, the Chevron case, 40 years of the NEPA, of the agencies as well as CEQ, Council of Environmental Quality, White House group. They would make the decisions. They would uniformly get to be the witness on a statutory reg. That's gone now. Chevron wiped that out after 40 years of doing it that way. So between Chevron, CEQ having no binding authority anymore, we're going to see this all for the sake of new oil, new gas, new petroleum. Let's lighten the load so those can get approved quicker. It's not going to happen. It's going to change every state back to the way they want it. It's going to change the greens, the blue states and the red states, and all of a sudden we're going to be litigating this much, much more. I think any state that handles it differently than another state is going to see litigation. The agencies between the West and the East. So I think there's going to be a backfire component. We're going to wish NEPA didn't get gutted the way it might be getting gutted.
Well, and I believe the good neighbor policy has gone away in some of these EOs, which is also going to just create that fighting between states. If one state is doing it one way and then the next state is doing it a different way, and then they're polluting the other state because, let's be real, our air and water don't have state boundaries. So that really is going to make things a lot more complex.
I'm glad you brought that up, and where I wanted to take it is that I think that certain next steps of energy generation and transmission are how to tie into these other ISOs and things like that, right? I mean, I can speak as a Texan for ERCOT that we've had this very isolationist standpoint for the historic life of ERCOT, and so interconnecting to SPP, interconnecting to MISO. But now, and I think that's necessary, probably moving forward. Some serious consideration needs to be put into that. But those challenges that y'all two just brought up are going to be larger now, more so than ever, right? You're working on multi-state pipeline or overhead electric transmission, and you don't have a single arching standard that's going to apply to that, right? That's going to present a lot of uncertainty into schedules and budgets.
It's kind of fascinating, this drive to eliminate kind of the federal rules and regulations, which I think have probably streamlined a lot of things in ways that we don't really quite realize yet. Because if we go back to a state-only model and a state government-only model, we're going to have so much inconsistencies that like just redefines the place of the federal government in my mind, right? To have this unifying entity that is supposed to help us streamline all of these rules and regulations. And it's just fascinating that it almost feels like we are doing the exact opposite than maybe what they intend at this point, right?
It's kind of like for renewable energy, I'll take Michigan as an example. We have townships, which not all states have townships. And you have to get a permit with every township. And if you know wind development or solar development, it could span 4 townships. So you would have 4 permits. You would have the county permits, you would have the state permits, and you might even have a federal permit depending on, if you impacted an eagle or endangered species of some sort. It is incredibly challenging to get the same standard, to do the same development, to get the same permits through 4 townships, let alone, going multi-state transmission line or pipeline, right? And so Michigan decided what we should do is have a state siting board, which then put policy standards in place that everybody had to follow. You still have to go to the community.
At least a baseline.
But it gave it a baseline. And it is to make sure that you're doing everything you need to do that township might need or that county might need. That's exactly what the federal government does with NEPA, with a lot of the other regulation. So you're absolutely right. It's kind of like taking us back to a place where it's going to be coordination after coordination after coordination. You think you're streamlining and you're going to save money.
You're not.
You're not.
Yeah.
It's not going to save any money, and it's going to be even more important to have consultants that are partners that understand the intricacies of those states and those communities to help you kind of navigate a shifting landscape. It's just challenging.
Well, job security for us, I suppose.
I guess.